it's a hard thing. We're after Google, Twitter, IBM, and now you got two people from the finance advertising industry coming to talk about you. But don't worry, it's going to be fun, and it's going to be a lot more interesting than hearing about insurance yesterday. So we're good. Tim, yeah. So why are we here? And we were discussing with the people before. First impressions are important, and you need to have in mind that when you go to the UK, when you go to raise capital, people are going to ask, well, what's Bulgaria? And let me ask you that question, Tim. So if I ask you, how do people perceive Bulgaria at the macro level? What would you say?
Sure, I certainly thank you for staying in the room. I feel a little bit like the Antichrist today at the Digitalk. I'm an economist, banker. I'm the only guy in the room with a suit as well. And I don't have a Twitter account.
Well, tell you what, that's two of us, and I work in the advertising industry.
Or Facebook.
So, don't say it loud.
So I'm very old school. I've covered the region for about 30 years and Bulgaria 20 odd years. So have been a frequent visitor here. And I guess it's really great that you're all here and there's a great mix of Bulgarians and also foreign investors. Because this country really needs investment. It needs foreigners to come here, have good experiences, to invest, come back and bring other people here. And we were talking before about what we talk about. And I guess I cover all the countries in the region, so my perspective is a comparative perspective, and it's very macro. So I apologize for people who are very much on the ground. But I guess, if you look at Bulgaria, and for the people who don't know much about it, I mean, it had a big economic crisis in 96, 97. They had a macro stabilization program, introduced a currency board in effect, exchange rate regime, and things were looking pretty good. Turn of the new millennium, 2000, 2001, you had a team of real economic reformers, the Bulgarian city boys, that were talking the right kind of language. Bulgaria obviously got EU membership, huge success for the country. In 2007, alongside Romania, things were looking great.
Absolutely.
For this place. I mean, the country was growing at 5-6%. It was top of the pile. And now I kind of look at Bulgaria, and just to take the regional perspective, people talk about the problems in Europe. I mean, actually, Europe is beginning to recover. That's kind of the good news, I guess. If you look at the recent macro data out of Europe, beginning to show some recovery. And actually, in this region, what you're seeing now is countries also beginning to recover. I mean, and there's a little bit of a growth table. Countries like Poland, Czech, Romania, Hungary, this year they're probably going to go around 3%. That's a really good number.
So let me ask you something. Do you see these countries as direct competitors for investment versus Bulgaria?
Well, just talk about, I mean, these guys are growing at 3%. Unfortunately, Bulgaria is growing at 1%. Or it's likely to grow 1% this year. Now, this audience may not be very reflective of the whole of the Bulgarian economy. I mean, you guys are the dynamic go-getters and you're driving the thing forward. But, at the macro level, it's not really working very well. And you went the question about the competitors. Foreign direct investment boomed in the period up to Lehman. A lot of it, unfortunately, was bank-related. Foreign banks came in, bought banks, threw capital around. That's finished. FDI flows into this region probably have halved, and they're going to stay at that level for the next decade. There's not going to be a big recovery in foreign direct investment. So there's going to be a brutal battle between countries for that smaller cake. And what it means is that you're going to have to fight really, really hard. You're going to have to offer foreign direct investors the best product, basically. I mean, the best service, skilled workers, competitive labor rates, low taxation, good business environment, low bureaucracy, low red tape. I mean, generally, it's a generally great business environment because Bulgaria is competing with the Turkeys, which has been a really fantastic business environment. It's a big market. Turkey, Poland, Hungary, Serbia. These countries all around are actually, really fighting very, very hard for that FDI. And unfortunately, the macro numbers, I mean, again, that may not be that reflective of this audience, but Bulgaria is struggling a bit, I have to say.
So it has some very strong points. We said there is talent. There's very good talent here. It does have some weaker points, as in the political environment, incentives to entrepreneurship. How can we change that?
Yeah, I mean, Bulgaria is an interesting one because, again, I started in Soviet studies, so 30 years ago. And interestingly, Bulgaria was always referred to as the 16th Republic of the former Soviet Union because typically new innovation in the Soviet Union, often it was tried out in Bulgaria. And many of you will know here in the audience that Bulgaria's niche was IT and computers in former communist times, right? So you had a great tradition. But interestingly, all the countries I go to, I always ask the question of policymakers, of ministers of finance, of central bankers, what do you do? What is Croatia good at? What is Serbia good at? What is Bulgaria good at? And I tell you, the answer from all of them is IT. They always say IT and agriculture. We've got the best Ukraine. We have the best brains. Come here. You'll have a great experience. So it's a very competitive market, and I guess Bulgaria's problem is the disappointment in terms of from politicians and policymakers, because they had a great opportunity a decade ago, and basically they screwed up, right? And it's a very challenging political and policy environment, and I guess the big challenge for Bulgaria is the skill base, maintaining your comparative advantage probably 20 years ago, which is lots of very, very clever, young, dynamic people, keeping them in the country, and maybe bringing some of the guys from overseas back.
It's hard to do that when you're part of the European Union and you can go work abroad for a better salary. So,
sure.
But then again, you have the chance to do your own startup here at a very low tax rate and a friendly environment. So those to me would be some very good selling points when you're talking to people that are willing to invest capital.
Sure. I mean, I don't think the macro environment itself is a huge impediment to doing business here. I mean, again, you've got a stable currency, low inflation, public finances generally in pretty good order, right? I mean, Bulgaria had a banking crisis, 6 months ago, and it's still here. It's survived.
It's much better off than Greece, isn't it?
Well, sure. I mean, its problem is, it's in a tricky region. It's probably geographically. I mean, it's a strength and a weakness, right? The location, I guess. It's close to Turkey. There's a lot of Turkish speakers in Bulgaria. If you're a foreigner, Bulgaria can be a great access to the Turkish market. Obviously, Bulgarians I've met are typically very entrepreneurial. Mm-hmm. They tend to see Bulgaria in the regional context, so they're very eager to do business across the region. So former Yugoslavia, Russia, Turkey. That's a great strength. So again, the foreign investors in the audience, there is definitely potential here, and I guess the message would be, come to Bulgaria, try it out. There are some big positives. Manage your expectations. There are definitely challenges, and I guess the ones would clearly be the business environment. That's definitely, I mean, you can read the EU reports, you can read the World Bank reports, corruption, red tape, bureaucracy, all that kind of stuff is, I guess, real for guys at the front line. And probably, I was talking to one person in the audience, one investor, and he was saying, it's actually quite difficult now to get the skilled people, because of the brain drain. And anything the government can do, I guess challenges for the government here would be, education. Education was a huge asset for Bulgaria. And now, unfortunately, because of austerity, like everywhere across the region, I think it's been neglected, and I guess there are less young people coming up. But keeping people here, bringing people back, Bulgarians overseas, encouraging them to come back and do business here, I think is probably a big priority for the official sector.
Mm-hmm. Back to the original topic of the speech, Greece, Ukraine. How do you see the region in general in terms of stability of people looking to invest in the region?
Well, I guess, the big international investors, they tend to view Europe. So basically, if you're a Korean technology company, your decision is it Africa, is it Europe, is it Latin America? And I think, the foreign direct investment numbers that we look at for emerging Europe, yes, sure, partly is related to the banking and the fact that there's less, banks are not investing and they're not building franchise across the region, but the other thing is, big international companies have been making decisions that they don't want to be in Europe, or they're over-invested in Europe. I used to work for a South African bank, and Africa saw huge amounts of FDI because it was in a region that was uninvested. Problem for Europe is it's been over-invested, and if you're outside Europe, the perception is it's in crisis. As I mentioned before, the positive is the macro numbers on growth are beginning to turn again, right? And I think that will begin to encourage more investment in Europe. A cheaper euro certainly helps that process, and that's been helping the growth process. So the first decision is, from a geographical, global perspective, where do I want to be? Europe's looking more interesting, we'll invest there. And then in Europe, where do we go? Is it Hungary, is it Poland? I mean, what is our product? Are we basically selling into the country, where Bulgaria's problem is obviously it's a small market? Are we making a product in this particular country to export elsewhere in Europe? Again, it's very competitive. Lots of countries are fighting for the same foreign direct investment cake. Don't give people reasons not to invest in your country. Again, it's kind of the wrong audience. It's kind of policymakers and politicians. I probably should be selling this
I
message
think
to.
the message to the audience here will be, you need to be, and some other speakers have said it, raising money is tough. You need to make sure that you're giving your best impressions, because you're fighting against other markets, not just other companies.
Yeah, it's interesting with Bulgaria. Again, my personal experience for the last sort of 20 years here, there's been periods where Bulgarians at the macro level, the high political level, have been very good at selling their country. Again, the Bulgarian city clubs, some of the former finance ministers here, former bankers, marketed in London aggressively a decade or so ago and sold a great story. The problem is when companies actually came here, they had very high expectations, and then there were expectations that weren't necessarily met. You have one bad experience, and then you decide to go somewhere else.
And this did happen across quite a few markets in Europe, not just Bulgaria. I mean, I'm thinking of Portugal, I'm thinking of Greece. Yeah. So it was a trend. There was lots of money being thrown at countries.
Yeah.
And not everyone invested it wisely.
Sure. I mean, just trying to answer your specific question that you asked at the start in terms of the region, is that, if you take out Greece and you try and isolate the Ukraine-Russia crisis, emerging Europe is looking a lot better now in terms of growth. I mentioned the 3% growth story in Romania's, Hungary's, Poland, those kind of countries. That's a really good number. That's an encouraging number. Growth helps, so it solves a lot of problems like public sector debt, for example. So that's really encouraging. And for the last 3 or 4 years, many countries have rebalanced. So the big problem in emerging Europe used to be external imbalances, large current account deficits, lots of external debt, problems of external financing. They're actually more or less resolved now. Countries don't really run large current account deficits. Currencies look pretty stable and should be stable, even strengthening, which, okay, maybe not great for exporting, but the macro is looking a lot better. The challenges, I think, are on the micro level. It's the thing, the doing business stuff, which is really hard to change.
The red tape you were referring to.
It's easy to say, let's improve the business environment. There are not many countries that have done it quickly and easily.
So it's not enough just to lower the taxes to 10%. That's a good step, but it's not enough.
Yeah, it's great, but I mean, in the end, you're just as an entrepreneur and a business person in a country. It's licensing. It's if you want to build a factory. I mean, going through the red tape for that kind of stuff. I mean, there are many countries that I would have thought would have been fantastic to do business in and perform terribly. I mean, a classic one is Croatia. Croatia, if anyone goes on holiday to Croatia, wonderful place, great experience, dreadful business environments. People tell me, it's just because if you're a tourism entrepreneur and you want to improve the tourism service in Croatia, it's almost impossible to get licensing to build a new hotel, right? And that's, it's those kind of nitty-gritty things
that stifles growth.
That stifles growth. I mean, again, the macro is looking okay in the region. Bulgaria is disappointing in terms of growth, and that relates to probably Greece, the region, political policy instability in the country a bit, or political instability mostly. It could and should be doing a lot better. Politicians, I think, need to really focus on improving the nitty-gritty stuff for business at the micro level, really focusing on that. I mean, the legal system, property rights, corruption, red tape, bureaucracy, all those really hard things to change.
Okay. Shall we throw it up to some questions from the audience? If anyone would like to ask something, over there. Yes, they're bringing it.
Hello, thank you. I would like to ask you to comment on 2 things. One is the cost of capital in Bulgaria, and especially related to the cost of capital of other countries in Europe which are in the EU zone, and other things is in the risk in our region, which is related to the cost of capital. Thank you.
It does remind me, actually, the introduction I had suggested I was with Standard Chartered Bank. Actually, it's a common mistake people make. It's actually Standard Bank, not Standard Chartered, two completely different institutions. So from a compliance perspective, I think it's quite important I mention that. In terms of cost of capital, I mean, at the macro level, if you look at the Bulgarian sovereign, how cheaply it borrows, I mean, actually fairly cheap. I mean, it's not, Bulgaria, its macro perception externally is quite solid, and that reflects its public finance profile, right? I mean, it's a solid public finance profile. I guess the problem in Bulgaria and across the whole region, and in terms of Europe, is governments can borrow quite cheaply because of QE and helicopter money. Banks are very reluctant to lend to the real economy. I mean, policymakers and regulators still haven't managed to figure out how that disconnect is resolved. And in the end, Bulgaria is still struggling from the Lehman crisis, high non-performing loans, the recent banking crisis. Unfortunately, Bulgaria and Serbia, you have a high prevalence of periphery banks. Obviously, Greek banks are fairly prevalent in Bulgaria. And banks are very, very, very risk averse, right? All banks are focusing on the same clients. So, banks, unfortunately, banks want to all do business with the foreign blue chips, the IBMs and the Twitters, and they don't, unfortunately, they're very nervous about doing business with innovators and small and medium-sized companies. And that's universal. It's the same in the UK. I think it's the same in Bulgaria.
And what's your view on the fact that Bulgaria is not in the euro? Is that an advantage right now? Is that a disadvantage, or both?
I think it's pretty neutral. I mean, I don't think that's... I mean, you have a stable currency. I think currency board system has worked pretty well. You survived Lehman, you survived the recent banking crisis. I don't think that's a huge issue, actually.
When going out and asking for
I don't think people... I mean, my investor base, which is institutional investors, big, large institutional investors, they rarely ask me about the stability of the exchange rate. I mean, it's a taken for given. I mean, what they focus on is, in Bulgaria, I mean, their concerns are politics, lack of clarity there, the location, Greece, the lack of growth. That's a big issue for them. I mean, in terms of making a decision. And the fact that there's lots of other places in the region that, are offering something a bit more exciting or have a better story. I mean, Turkey, for example. Turkey, at the moment is going through a much lower growth period, but in recent years has been top of the growth stakes, and it's a big market.
Immense market. Yeah.
It's a big, and I think the other, again, maybe not for the right audience, but I think for countries like Bulgaria, what is important is, have a plan and a strategy. What is Bulgaria's niche? Again, the basic question I ask countries and policymakers: what do you do? I mean, what are you going to invest in? What is this? What should this country be known for? And maybe it's IT, right? Well, if it's IT, have a plan, go forward and drive with it. And you need someone at the top with vision. I mean, we can talk about Turkey and Prime Minister Erdogan. I mean, he has his critics. And he's not very favourable towards Twitter, I seem to remember. But look, the guy is impressive in terms of the guy is a leader. He sets direction. He has people around him who deliver on the message. And I think Bulgaria and other countries in the region, I think, I don't think a small country like Bulgaria, and I don't mean to be offensive anyway, but I mean, the guys at the top really need to work very, very hard in taking away all impediments to investors who are thinking of coming here, right? And they need to sell the story really well on an international scale.
But it can be done. Other countries have done it successfully.
Well, I guess one of the ones that is remarkable is Saakashvili in Georgia. It didn't turn out that well for him in the end. But in terms of the country, I think that's done most in that the thing that is Bulgaria's biggest problem, which is the business environment. Again, red tape, bureaucracy, corruption. I mean, what Georgia achieved in a period of 5 years was incredible, really incredible. And actually, it probably wasn't necessarily Saakashvili and politicians. I mean, it was the Georgians themselves that did it. there was a zero tolerance for corruption at the micro level. Now, maybe that's something Bulgarians should take hold of. It can be done, and Georgia was it's very difficult. I mean, one of my focus at the moment is Ukraine. I mean, it's a massive focus in Ukraine about the drive against corruption. Ukraine's a really big country, huge country. It's very difficult to do it. Georgia did it relatively small. I think Bulgaria could do it.
Because it's agile enough to do it. You
can
read about change.
I mean, it's small enough that the population, if social media and all that stuff. I mean, energize into this anti-corruption gig, that the Georgians succeeded. And I think and then once you do it with the Georgians, for example, I mean, they marketed it like crazy. And it was something great to sell to the international community. Hey, we're a small country, but we've made this huge achievement in driving up the World Bank doing business tables by killing corruption. And foreign investors like that. And not only they like the story, the message, but when they come and they locate and do business and invest in the country, they have a positive experience.
It gives a lot of exposure to other companies. It's a positive contagion effect.
Sure. But again, everything's about expectations. In Bulgaria, we've been there before. We've had the Bulgarian City Club group that promised a lot and didn't deliver. So again, it's about once you get the foreign direct investor to come here and experience, you want him to have a good experience. So you want to make sure that once you've improved the business environment, that's when you get him here, right?
Okay. Any other questions?
Maybe you just answered the question, but who does it right from all the broad range of countries that you cover as an emerging markets economist? What do you think is the best model that a small country can follow or adopt to stand out and be recognized? Is it Georgia? Is it what you said?
Look, I guess if you asked the foreign international investor base a basic question, in emerging Europe, which country in emerging Europe is the IT success story, right? Now, it probably could have been Bulgaria 25 years ago, right? I mean, it had the potential, but I guess most people will say Estonia, right? Skype and all that stuff, right? But, I mean, the Baltics, I think, have done an incredible job. Now, economic developments, there are lots of different models, but in the end, why countries develop, there are lots of factors that come together at particular points in time that determine whether a country is successful or not, right? The Baltics had a very different historical experience, social, cultural, economic experience. Maybe, it's not transferable here, but they are small countries. Mm-hmm. They had fixed exchange rates, like Bulgaria. I don't see any reason why a country like Bulgaria cannot follow a Baltic model or a Georgian model. Now, okay, Georgia succeeded under Saakashvili. They had political problems. Subsequently, Saakashvili's left. Now it's a little bit more challenging. But the lasting legacy in Georgia, and I go to Tbilisi quite a lot and talk to guys there, and the question mark after Saakashvili left with the new Georgian Dream administration, has corruption? Is it still dead? Okay, there is obviously some corruption, but at the micro level, with people's everyday lives, they say actually. So people have gotten used to it. It's stayed. It's been lasting, and they see one of the big positives. People do see an improvement in the basic interaction with governments. If they want a passport or they need to register some land, all that kind of stuff, it's a better experience. So, I think Bulgaria. This is where Bulgaria. And it's not rocket science, and I'm not saying anything that isn't said by the World Bank, the EU, all these kind of IFIs. It's obvious the Bulgarian government know it, but I said it's very difficult to do. But it has to be the focus. The macro is okay. The problems are at the micro level. It's the business environment.
And this audience can help as well, as you say, by setting examples.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't have a business at the micro level. Maybe people in this room, foreign investors in this room, have had much better experience in Bulgaria, and maybe those experiences are despite government. They just get on with it and do it, and maybe they have a different experience to me. All I can say is, well, at the macro level, the numbers don't really show a huge level of success at the micro level. Ultimately, it will feed through into great growth numbers, and it's not feeding through, unfortunately.
Mhm.
I have a question. So as an entrepreneur here, and many of us are, and I have a small business, I actually don't feel that much impact of corruption on the business environment. Like, we have a flat tax, it's one of the best in the EU. And what I'm wondering is, like, we have this perception of corruption because we do have corruption in bureaucracy on the low levels, like, you know, getting permissions for whatever, some construction or something like that. But if we look at what we might call corruption, is lobbyism, for example, in the West. Is it possible that we just have to retune our message to say, yeah, there's corruption in some little areas, but the business environment isn't really that corrupt? Like, can we improve investment here in the cost of capital by just sort of marketing our corruption in a different way? You know what I mean? It sounds, well, but we all have corruption in the world. It's everywhere. You call it lobbyism or legalized corruption, or call it
consultancy.
Well, which it is, right? I mean, so can we do that?
Yes. The answer is probably yes, but it has to be an effort from everyone around, not just the government. Because
Everybody
no one's
start
gonna
tweeting
believe
that.
the government.
Our corruption is cute.
No, but that's exactly the right attitude, as we were saying. I would agree with that. It's exactly what needs to be done.
Look, I mean, there's corruption everywhere, right? I mean, you know, you were completely right. Our politicians that milk the speaker circuit very aggressively. I don't necessarily think that's very appropriate, frankly.
Well, you got in Germany people falsifying their doctoral thesis, for example, and that's not very proper as well.
Sure. I mean,
But I think it's how you react to
Yeah.
things like this. You know?
Look, I mean, guys like me, I mean, I'm not an entrepreneur, I'm not the micro level. Maybe I'm totally misreading the Bulgarian situation. You know, and I don't have all the answers, right? I mean, I put my hands up, I'm learning every day I go through life, right? I mean, all I can say, you know, if you look at the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index, you look at the World Bank's Doing Business Index, and these surveys have their faults, right? But generally, Bulgaria does score pretty poorly, right? I mean, unfortunately, that's the reality. And maybe it's other sectors, maybe it's not this subset of the economy that is necessarily at the hard edge of that kind of corruption. Maybe it's elsewhere in public procurement and all those kind of things. But in the end, this sector, or this group, is only part of the economy, right?
But those surveys that you mentioned, they generate perception in the investor community, like any other survey.
Sure.
Th-
Well, I
they
think
are,
I think there are other things like business, like organized crime, for example, or the judiciary. I mean, it's a bit broader in terms of the business environment. It's not just the registration process. I mean, I think it would. These are certainly challenging in Bulgaria, and I guess if they are improved, it would make everyone's life much better, and the economy would grow at a much stronger pace, and it would create more business for everyone. You know, I do think it needs addressing. I actually don't agree that it's just perceptions. You know, I think if it was just perceptions, then Bulgaria's growth number would be 5%. It wouldn't be 1%. Something's going wrong in this country, and I think it's better to be honest and for politicians to accept there is a problem and try and resolve it. So there's a question here, I think, the lady.
I just wanted to agree with Steve, but I don't have a microphone.
It's okay. The lady wanted to agree.
Any other questions?
No.
Actually, just in answer to Steve, I mean, I would say, you know, if you have good experience in this country, then sell it. Go overseas. I mean, you know, there are plenty of foreign banks here that would be more than happy to organize an international roadshow of people who've had good experiences like you. I mean, you know, the bank I work for doesn't have a franchise here, but, you know, the Italian banks or the Greek banks or whatever, I mean, knock on their door and say, hey, you know, people are misreading Bulgaria. Let's do a roadshow in London and New York and Frankfurt, and let's sell a better message. I mean, you know, take ownership of this thing.
A quick follow-up on Steve's questions. If the foreign direct investment will be flat for the next 10 years, as you said, it's expected, can we influence investment here with local money in Bulgaria? What can we do on institutional level to encourage more risk on the institutional money that will fund venture capital and etc.? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, it's not really my area of expertise. you know, I guess in the end, you know, you can wait around for foreign capital, but domestic capital, I mean, in the end, you know, it's Bulgarians who understand the business environment here better than anyone else. And, you know, in emerging Europe, you know, frankly, there's no shortage of capital, local capital. If I think of Ukraine, all these oligarchs, Russian, I mean, there's plenty of money in the region.
Mm-hmm.
They just prefer not to invest it in their own countries. They prefer to invest it in real estate in London and, you know, so, you know, I mean, I guess, you know, it's up to Bulgarians to take ownership of it. There's plenty of opportunities, I'm sure, in Bulgaria. You guys understand your environment better than any of the foreigners who are coming in. You know, start in your own country, invest here. Now, why don't Bulgarians invest in their own country? Big question. I don't think it's just Bulgaria. I mean, it's the same in India. You know, why don't Indians invest in their own country? And it reflects, it is a difficult business environment, right?
Question here.
I'm surprised so many people have stayed in the room for a banker.
But it's something that affects everyone doing business, so I think it is an interesting subject.
Hello, my name is Krasmir Vasilov, and my question is, what do you think is our real competitive advantage as a country? You have a broad view of the region, so what is your view about our strengths? Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let me start with one, talent. There is lots of IT talent, not just in this room, but in the country in general. You do have very good coding skills, you do have engineering skills. That's an advantage. Not every country has that, and at the English-speaking level.
No, sure. I mean, look, I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, I think IT and the skill base here is definitely, you know, top of the region. You know, tourism, food and agricultural sector, all that kind of stuff, sure. A hub for the region. You mentioned the language. I'll tell you an anecdotal story that may interest you, and what concerns me particularly. So I'm from the UK. I live in London, but I'm from a small town in the north of England. I described it, it's like the English Donbass, right? So it's steel, coal. It's been in massive decline for the past 10 years, 20 years, right? Very high unemployment, very high social deprivation. I wouldn't advise going there, frankly. It's not a place you'd go on holiday, particularly. But I have family there, and I go back and, you know, to see family, and I stay at a hotel in my hometown. Very high unemployment. It's like 25% crazy. So I check into this Golden Tulip or wherever the hotel is, and all the staff are Bulgarian. Can you imagine that? I mean, I can understand Bulgarians relocating to London, but to relocate to my hometown, that is not a very pleasant place. But, you know, I mean, I think that's in a way encouraging that Bulgarians are entrepreneurial, they get out there and they have a drive to work. It doesn't say a lot about my hometown that the local guys don't have the skill set to actually work in a hotel. But it's also quite disappointing for Bulgaria that those people with the language skills cannot find opportunities here and left this country. And that for somewhere that I wouldn't think has a huge pull factor. London, New York, Madrid, yeah, not my hometown. I mean, you know, keeping you know, Bulgarians, skilled, talented Bulgarians, which you have definitely, keeping them in the country, motivating them, and that's the big challenge, one of the big challenges for the country. I don't think I answered your question very well at all.
But so we, not only did everybody stay, we actually have to kick you off because we're now over time. So
Okay, sorry for
not only
that.
did people stay, but they actually enjoyed it. So bravo, Tim. I think some takeaways though before you guys leave is one, we should all be tweeting our foreign direct investment ministry to do a roadshow. And maybe we can even get some advice from you on how to do that, because I think we need to start promoting that the business environment in Bulgaria is actually quite good. And two, we need to bring the Bulgarians back and start promoting how actually good it is when we, as ambassadors of our own country, go abroad, because it's a great environment. I think this is testament to that. So thanks, guys. It's really cool. Appreciate it. And then, yeah, I'm kicking them off.